Long exposures, nice. Great thing about video I find amazing is that I can do my intro to this video at the end of my photo shoot. The main reason why I'm doing that is because my intro that I recorded earlier, it was about 4:30, 4:45 in the morning. I was knackered. There's bags under my eyes. Photo shoots can be tiring, lugging all this gear around, especially if you're going somewhere a little bit further away. Little tip, bring food. I ain't been up very long and didn't get much sleep last night, so the intro I don't think was very good, so I'm going to start again. Welcome. It is early, it was early, it's now a bit later, on a Friday morning. We are in Southsea at South Parade Pier, which I've shot a few times. You've probably seen a couple of videos and maybe some pictures before. I wanted to do a sunrise photo shoot on South Parade Pier. It didn't happen, unfortunately. The sun didn't come out. However, my main reason for doing this video today was to give you an opportunity to understand long exposures. In this series I'm going to be giving you tips and tricks to get out of auto mode on your camera, switch that baby off and whack it straight into manual, and you're going to get better images instantly. And I'm going to give you the simple and easy tips, tricks and my thoughts on how to get your photography banging really quick. You don't need to go to college. If you've been to college, great, nice one, fully appreciate that. But I'm self-taught and I think my images speak for themselves, and I think I've got a lot of experience to give to you guys. So if you're a beginner or an enthusiast, you've just picked up your first DSLR, or you've had a DSLR for some time but kept it in auto, this is your opportunity to follow me and get some great advice about shooting better and getting some really good images. So I did do my research on the weather. The weather looked okay yesterday. It was supposed to be a fairly nice morning. It didn't matter to me if there was going to be a bit of cloud, but I at least wanted a bit of sun, which we're not going to get. So okay, we can't completely rely on the weather forecast. We know that. It's England, it's crap. But the other thing I did research was the tide times. Now the tide is out to a degree. It's not out as far as it can go. I think it's still on the way out, I think, possibly. So we've got a bit of time. I'm not worried about when I do this long exposure shot. I could do it now if I wanted to, or I can wait an hour, I could wait 2 hours, I could do it during the day, I could do it at night if I had to. Long exposure photography isn't always dependent on the time of day you do it. It just depends on the type of image and the type of result you want to get. Now I need a bit of sunshine, so I'm going to have to wait a little while. So while I wait, I can go through a few things with you. Some of the stuff you're going to need for long exposure shots, because it's not just a matter of taking a little point and shoot and getting out there and doing it, especially during the day. So sit back for 2 minutes, relax while I get some gear out. I'm going to set up my camera, get some bits and pieces out and show you what you need to get a long exposure. Let's do this. Dollop of okay, you're on a beach in England, check the area for dog little tip. That's tip number one for you. Tip number two, get a decent tripod. This thing Wasn't cheap, wasn't really expensive, but you need a really good sturdy tripod for long exposures. That's tip number 2. Make sure it's dug in properly. Long exposures, you do not want any movement at all in the camera. So get as close to the ground as you can. I'll suggest if you want a tripod, do it like I've done it, right on the ground. Put it down as low as you can go. And make sure it's sturdy. Long exposures during the day, you're going to need something to stop down the light. Now this is an ND3 filter. This is a Haida ND3, which is suggested to be at 10 stops. It's actually in fact not. This is a really good filter. It wasn't cheap by any stretch. I've had it about 7 years, but when I tested it initially, the stops I got were nearer to sort of 13, 14 stops. So be careful when you do your calculations. I'll show you the calculator in a second, but you're going to need a decent ND filter. Don't buy cheap. There are some plastic ones on the market you can buy for a couple of quid. They will distort your images. They will give you really bad colour casts, which can be sorted out in post, but a decent ND filter is going to be your best bet by a long shot. ND filter. ND filters come in various sizes, and they come in sizes depending on the size of your lens. So bear that in mind when you buy one. This one is a 77mm, and you see that on there, 77mm. That corresponds to the 77mm on the front of my lens on this lens. However, I use more than one lens for landscape photography, and my other lenses are smaller. Do I need to buy another ND filter? No, you don't. What you need to buy is a stop down filter ring, which essentially makes this fit other filters. You screw on the step down, step down on the front of this, and then you buy the size of step down that you require for your other filters. So I've got 2 or 3 step downs for various different sizes of filter. Buy the largest filter size you have, because you can't step up, you've got to step down, otherwise you're going to get weird vignetting and circular stuff in the pictures. It won't look good. So bear that in mind. That's a really good tip. But decent ND filter, buy the largest one for your largest lens, and get step down or stop down filter rings for your other filters. Job done. And the other thing you're going to need is a shutter release, a manual shutter release. Now most of the cameras on the market nowadays will allow you to have a shutter speed of up to 30 seconds. Now, for what we want to do during the day, and with this ND filter, is go way beyond 30 seconds. We want to go somewhere around 2 minutes to 4 minutes, have a 4-minute exposure. We want to do some arty stuff with our camera. It's going to make it completely different to someone who's going to shoot this composition in auto settings. So we want to go way beyond the capabilities of the settings in the camera, so you need one of these. And you also need a camera that's got the bulb function. You'll notice a B, if it's a Canon, on your turnstile, your ring on the top, and that's the setting you're going to want it in when we do this. The other thing that you're going to need, which is very vital, is a way of calculating your exposure. Now this can be done very simply with your initial exposure in your camera. So you find the exposure that you require without the filter, and then you adjust using calculations once you put the filter on to get the right exposure. Now there are cheat sheets online, and you can probably download one from Google, just put in cheat sheet for exposure calculations, or you can get an app. Now I have an app on here, funnily enough, it's called Exposure Calculator. So this thing is pretty ingenious. I don't know if you can see on there, but if you look at the top half here, that would be our normal exposure without a filter. This half down here is our exposure with a 13 stop filter. You see the 13 there, and it gives us our time in shutter speed there. Now obviously this is calculating for something completely different. I haven't done this calculation for today, but if that's what I needed to do, that's what I needed to do. So that's your normal exposure at the top, and this will pump out your exposure you require for a 13 stop filter. Obviously you can change that. If you've got a different filter, you can have a 2 stop filter, 16 stop filter, and it'll calculate your exposure for you. So bear that in mind. And there's loads of them apps. This isn't the only exposure calculator app. This is the one I've found to be the easiest to use. And the other thing that's good about this app is it gives you a stopwatch on there. So once you've calculated your timer, if your camera hasn't got a countdown or count up, mine has, fortunately, but if it hasn't, this is really good, because all you got to do is hit that, hit the shutter release button, hold it open, jobs are good. So guys, before we do the calculation on this and take any pictures, I just want to go through what this series is about. This series is about enabling me to help you, if you're an enthusiast or beginner, to expose for whatever you want to expose for. Now in this video it's about long exposures, so we're going to be concentrating on that. So if you haven't watched my first video on how to calculate your exposure normally, you need to watch that first, guys, because I'm not going to cover everything I covered in that video here today. That video is like 18-20 minutes long, so if you want to stop this video now, hit the little link at the top there, you'll see it pop up in a second, and watch that video first, guys. If you don't know how to correctly get your exposure right first time without a filter, this video isn't going to make much sense to you, because I'm not going to go through that again. Okay guys, as a test, I'm now going to turn my camera on. When I'm doing landscapes, generally I will use the screen on the back. If you've got a screen, great. If you haven't, you'll need to use your viewfinder. So first of all, we're going to put our camera into manual mode. Get out of auto, guys, get into manual. I've set my ISO at 100 because for landscapes I want my images to be crisp and sharp and have no noise or grain in them whatsoever. So we're at ISO 100. At the moment I'm going to stick my aperture at around 11, because that's generally for landscapes a good place to start. And then I'm going to adjust my shutter speed to find a good or reasonable exposure. My histogram, my dial are telling me that 1.6 seconds is a good exposure time for that. I'm going to hit that, there we go. I'm then going to come to my exposure calculator, put those details into it, into the top part which I showed you earlier on. So we've got an aperture of 11, we've got 1/6 of a second, So with my aperture at 11 and my ISO at 100, the ND filter, which is a 13 stop filter, has given me 218 minutes of exposure time. Now I'm not going to sit here for 3 hours and 38 minutes. So one thing I'm going to do there is bump up my ISO. I'm going to go up to if I go to 800, it's giving me 27 minutes. If I bring down the aperture to 8, it's giving me 13 minutes. So the only other thing we can do, because I'm not going to sit here for that amount of time, is wait for the sun to come up. Because if the sun comes up, we'll get a much faster shutter speed at those settings. So let's wait for that. I've got a bit closer to the water because I'm now going to talk about why we would want to take a long exposure and maybe some reasons why you might not want to. Long exposures or anything you might say above even something like 2 or 3 seconds. Now what that gives us is movement in the image. Longer long exposures are going to create a weird and wonderful look in an image where we go beyond the small movements of objects. So if you've got things like nice clouds and you want to show a bit of movement, you might do a 5 or 6 minute exposure and you will get movement of those clouds right through your image. Now as I talk, I'm going to be putting a few images up that I've done recently of long exposures so you can understand what I mean. Canoe Lake, for instance, there was cloud cover. That was I think it was like a 4.5 minute exposure, something along those lines. The front of the pier that I shot last week from across the road, that long exposure was about a 6 minute exposure, which made those clouds almost make like a streak effect across the top of the pier, which looked pretty cool. So when you think about long exposures, you've got to think about what is going to be the interest in the picture. Now if you are doing a landscape and it's a bright sunny day with no clouds, there's no reason whatsoever to do a long exposure. The only reason why you'd want to do a long exposure is if you had some interest in the sky, because the ground isn't going to move, it's not going to give you any interest to do a long exposure. There's no reason to do that. So with a seascape it's a little bit different, because there's always movement. Even though it's quite calm out there, there's always a bit of movement in there which is going to be caught by the camera, and that's going to be transformed into a silky smooth lake type image. So even if I didn't have any clouds, which I do to be fair, and it's probably going to look quite cool, and there's even a bit of colour creeping in as we speak, where the sun has come up. The sun came up about 5-10 minutes ago, but there's no sunrise there whatsoever. It's behind clouds. But up here at the moment, I don't know if you can see, but there's blue behind the clouds there. There's a little bit of red, a little bit of magenta seeping in. That will come out in the image, so I'm happy about that. If you're doing a landscape, that's one reason why you might not want to do a long exposure, unless you've got movement that you want to remove. If you're doing a landscape shot and for instance you're near a field with cows or some animals in there that are moving around regularly, and you do a 6 minute exposure, they're going to disappear. If you're shooting for instance a pier on opening day when it reopens, and you're out the front, up the top on the main road, just up there, and you want to remove all the people, you do a 6 minute exposure. I shot this on the other side of the road on a busy Saturday afternoon when there was probably hundreds of people going in and out of the front of the pier, around the pier, walking past the pier. There were buses and cars in my shot. They're not there because I've done a 6 minute exposure. So if you're doing a cityscape in the middle of the day, or you want to go down a high street in the middle of the day and you want to take a picture, do a long exposure. Get yourself a really good ND filter with 10 stops or above and shoot 6 to 10 minutes. You're going to lose everyone, and that's the brilliant thing about long exposures. That's the thing that amazes people when they see a picture. The layperson doesn't know it's a long exposure unless you tell them, but compare that against an image that's just taken like a snapshot of exactly the same composition and you win hands down. You'll see on the back of my camera here that I put this over my viewfinder, because when you do long exposures In fact, when you do any exposure and your viewfinder is open, there's a chance the light can get in through there and hit your sensor. So this is an easy and cheap way. I've seen people use masking tape, but you can get little caps. You might have one attached to your strap. You don't know what it is. It's a little plastic thing or a little rubber thing on your strap. That's actually what goes over your viewfinder when you want to close your viewfinder off. For this reason, when you do a long exposure or when you do anything over a couple of seconds, you're going to want to close that off to stop light getting in there. That's another good tip. Bear that in mind. So you might not realise, but I started this exposure some time ago, and it's actually going to be a 17-minute exposure. I didn't want to do anything that long, but I wanted to show you what can be done with an ND filter, and I've still got 9 minutes to go. So once it's done, I'll let you know. This sea's coming in, by the way. I didn't realise it was on the way back in, so hopefully will be done by the time it reaches. Another little tip for you when you're doing exposures this long and it's either getting dark or getting light out, you need to adjust or compensate for the fact that it's getting lighter. So you might have done your calculation in here and you've started a 17-minute exposure, but during those 17 minutes it's actually getting lighter outside, so the ambient light is going to affect that exposure. So we may want to cut that down by maybe 30 seconds or so, so we'll see. Again, if it's night time and it's getting darker, you'll be surprised. Your eyes don't really see it because your eyes adjust really well to dark and contrasty situations, but your camera doesn't. You have to tell your camera what to expose for. So if you're doing a long exposure and the sun's going down, you might want to increase your exposure time to adjust for the fact that you're losing light every minute. 2 minutes to go. Excited. It's been a while since I've done an exposure this long. I tend to, if I can, keep it below 6 minutes or around that kind of time. Anything above there, you find some weird artifacts come in to play, especially with some cheaper ND filters. Hopefully this one will be fine. I'm not expecting this to be the best image in the world. I don't want to toot my own horn. I think it's going to be quite good. It's nearly done, I think. Fingers crossed. Comes out alright. There she be. Worst thing about beaches, sand. Just be careful, especially when you're putting the kit back away in your bag. So if you get sand everywhere, you're going to scratch your lenses, you're going to scratch your filters, and then they'll be knackered for next time you'll be stuffed. Just another tip.